Okay, I'm assuming that. One second. Yeah. Okay. Right. So, before I get into it, I would again request you people to switch on your cameras so that thoda engaging ho, nahi to it feels like talking to a wall. Uh, so I'll wait for like a couple of minutes. Try to switch on your cameras unless you're really busy and can't. Hello Vaishnavi, how are you? Hi Taro.
अमेज पहाड़ देखो मेरे पीछे
ओहो भाई, कहाँ है तू अभी?
नानी घर
ओहो भाई, amazing, amazing, amazing. Mithilesh Kumar, yeah, it's fine. हम्म ठीक है, आई गेस इतने ही होंगे वैसे भी, कोई बात नहीं. Right. What we can do today, I was thinking, is that instead of like having questions in the chat, probably what you can do is like just type QUISTION in the chat in case you want to ask a question. I'll recognize you and you can unmute and then ask the question. I think matlab, we can try that out how that works. If in case like you are really shy and you don't want to do that, then you can probably use like chat as a last resort, but try to like start taking part in the conversation that we are having, because as and when mocks begin, this is ultimately what you're going to have to do. Like, these one-way sessions aren't going to help. At a point in time you need to prepare a case on your own and deliver a 7-minute feedback, right? So let's try and get into the zone. Like, let's try to start getting into that zone. Great, amazing. So having said all of that, what is today's session about? I think if I were you, I would ask two questions to whoever the session was, to whoever the taking this session. That is to say, why do I need to know about adjudication at this point in time? अभी अभी तो मेरे को बताया था कि debating कैसे करनी है. I probably don't have clarity with respect to those things only. अभी तक तो 100% या 80% मेरे को उसी में clarity नहीं है. अभी मेरे को और इसको, why are you subjecting me to adjudication at this point in time, an entirely new thing and everything? That's probably one question that you would ask. And secondly, is that why is adjudication important even for me to learn or know about? Because I'm probably just gonna either mock made debate, or I'm gonna participate as a debater in the future tournaments. You are the seniors, you are gonna adjudicate us, so why should I give a shit about what is adjudication? Yeah, why is it important? So yeah, correct. So these are the two questions that I want to start with before I get into the crux of this session and the complexities of it. What is an adjudicator? And then as to why that's important. Two questions, simple. Let's take it through one step at a time. Who is an adjudicator? What is an adjudicator? As Akshat said, it's basically a judge, a person who decides who wins a particular debate, a person who gives you your speaker scores कि आपने कितना अच्छा बोला है, कितना बुरा बोला है on a particular scale. These roles, the person who carries out these roles is called an adjudicator. Fancy word, same as a judge, कोई ज़्यादा खास difference नहीं है. The only difference probably with respect to the kind of judging that you are familiar with is that the adjudicators or adges that we have here in parliamentary debates are not industry specialists or acclaimed teachers or parents or your principal or something like that, which means that these are not acclaimed or esteemed guests who come and judge your particular debate, who adjudicate your particular debate. Your adjudicator in a parliamentary debate is just like you, who is also competing with other adjudicators, trying to win as an adjudicator while you are trying to win as a debater. So that's the only difference when it comes to parliamentary debating में adjudicator किसे बोलते हैं. It's just an individual who is here to judge you and tell you why you won or why you lost, and then on the basis of how much they were able to be convincing to you, they get scored, and on the basis of that score they also like form like a pool of competition within and amongst themselves. So that's basically who an adjudicator is in terms of parliamentary debating. I'll एक second क्या. I think we need to learn adjudication as we need to understand the mentality of the educator. Yep, absolutely right. Absolutely. That is one of the primary reasons why you need to be aware of what adjudication is. So that's number one, right? Who is an adjudicator? Adjudicator judges you, decides who the winner is, tells you why you won or lost, etc. Why is adjudication important? One of the reasons is already mentioned in the chat, that it's important to know the process of adjudication, and it's important to know along what lines an adjudicator is thinking, so that you as a debater can have clarity with respect to what sort of burden fulfillment you need to do to win that particular debate. Which means that if I arbitrarily enter into a debate room and I start speaking without having any idea as to who is judging me, what are they going to judge me on the basis of, etc., etc., without any idea about the format or stuff, I probably am likely to lose that round because I absolutely have not paid heed to how the adjudicator functions. Here's a simple example, right? And this is like a very personal example, and I like to use it a lot of places to show how dumb I was before I joined debating and how smart I think I have become after it. So, you people should be aware of what ECA admissions are. ECA admission, तुम अभी अभी ड्यू में तुमने एडमिशन लिया है. EC admissions, if you people heard about it during the process, is basically another channel for um, people who excel or think they excel in extracurricular activities to get admission into Delhi University without like having to go through the rigorous, or without having to like meet the rigorous criteria set by the percentage and stuff like that, which most of the people have to enter DU through. So ECA requires you or asks you to appear in the field of your interest and come for a selection process. And if you get selected through that process, a merit list is created, and on the basis of that merit list, you can get admission in esteemed colleges with respect to their interest in you. Which means that what ends up happening is, say 10 people decide that, you know what, let's appear through ECA. So 10 people say कि चलो debating में ECA लेते, and I appear for the debating trials, and I go through the process, and ultimately a merit list is be created जहाँ पे मेरा नाम कहीं पे होगा, and on the basis of that the college will be like, अच्छा हाँ मेरे को debater चाहिए, ये list है, हाँ ठीक है तेरा rank 7th 8th, चलो आ जाओ मेरे college में, marks से मेरे को फर्क नहीं पड़ता. That's basically what the ECA process looks like. So while in 2019, when I was looking forward to joining Delhi University, I didn't want to leave any stone unturned, because DU ही आना था sort of thing. So along with my academic requirements and qualifications, I had also applied into the ECA selection process, and I had applied into I think one was theater and one was debate. So theater में मेरा ठीक ठाक सीन था, अच्छा खासा हुआ था. Debating में I remember there were it was a two-way process debating में. So the first time you go ahead, you enter, दोनों बारी we were given topics, and like the motions read exactly same as the ones you are going to be subjected to and the ones we deal with in parliamentary debating. But at that point in time, though, reading those motions for the first time without having any sort of background knowledge was slightly frightening. But anyway, the deal was same. We were given 15 minutes. We were told to pick out a motion of our choice, pick up a side of our choice, and then present that in, say, in a 3 to 4 minute speech, and then be subjected to questions. So the first phase of the trial happened. I went in, and it was a very haywire speech. I had saved up a lot of space and a lot of my time for including a lot of economics ka knowledge which I had recently gathered 11 12th mein, to include in my speech. And the debate was not even remotely close to economics, right? The debate was probably something about parental leave. And I was like कि मैं इसमें economic घुसाऊंगा, I'll make substance out of it. My speech should have like be substantive. It should not be vague, abstract, etc. तो मैंने बहुत मेहनत करी, मैंने बनाया स्पीच फलाना टिंका करके. बट देन आई रियलाइज कि while delivering that speech, I was just left with 30 seconds to talk about that economics, and I couldn't involve the economics that I wanted to involve in that speech. Anyway, I was slightly sad, but I got through. I got through for the second round of selections. I went in again. This time I was like adamant कि last time मेरा selection हुआ है, तो it has been because of the 30 seconds of economics. इस बार पूरा का पूरा economics पे debate करूँगा, speech दूँगा. Amazing. सेकेंड टाइम गया ऑडिशन के लिए, एंड उन्होंने टॉपिक दिया. आई थिंक सिमिलर टॉपिक था, आई डोंट रिमेम्बर एग्जैक्टली कुछ भी. क्या मोशन था, जो भी था, it again not remotely close to economics, but I was like इकोनॉमिक्स. तो मैंने कुछ भी लॉ डिमांड फलाना टिंका करके कुछ भी बनाया, एंड देन पूरा 5 minutes at length I spoke only about economics or whatever I could bring out in that motion. And while my speech and when my speech got over, I was expecting questions. It was a panel of 4 to 5 people. Some were ex-students, some were esteemed professors, etc. So I was expecting questions to be thrown at me. But to my surprise, no one asked me a single question. And they were like, uh, only one of them said something to the effect of, so this forms the crux of your case, right? And I'm like, yes, absolutely, you got it right. तो उसने पूछा ग्रेट अमेजिंग, थैंक यू. तो आई वाज लाइक भाई आई हैव ब्लोन देयर माइंड, दे डोंट नो व्हाट टू आस्क मी, सो आई एम डेफिनेटली गेटिंग थ्रू. तो मैं निकला वहां से एंड आई अपने घर पे बोला कि अमेजिंग हो गया, नाइस स्टफ. DU में something that you should know about the ECA का process is that you in the second round you're marked out of 75. You're marked out of 75, right? उसमें से 20 number is your achievements that you have gained up till that point. बाकी 55 are what you got scored out of in that second process तुम्हारे speech के basis पे. I wasn't even called for trials, bhai, sorry. But kya bolu. But anyway, so so 55 में तुमको score करते हैं, and the minimum marks that you need to get out of that 55 to even have your name on the merit list is 15. If you have more than 15 marks, you will have your name on the merit list. If you don't have 15 marks, you're not going to have your name on the merit list. I did not have my name on the merit list post the second round. And I was stunned, like, what the fuck just happened? Did I just not blow their minds and stuff? Evidently I had not, right? And I had no idea as to what I had done wrong, because in my head I was like, this is the speech that I would say 100 more times if given an opportunity. Then जो भी हुआ, I got through the academic process. ECA कुछ फायदा हुआ नहीं. I did not use that anywhere and joined DEPSOC. Months have passed and the first induction session हमारा हो रहा है, and the first session that these my seniors are taking, and the first thing that they say is that don't throw facts in a debate room. And I'm like, wow. ये तो बताया नहीं था, ये तो पता ही नहीं था. And it is like, so after 3 months, it took me like 3 months to realize that what a blunder I had made out of the given opportunity, because I did not have an idea as to on the basis of what I am being adjudicated, on the basis of what I am being judged. Therefore, the story ka moral of the story is that, as someone rightly said, it's extremely important to know how an adjudicator thinks and functions and what they credit and what not, in order to be absolutely sure as to what kind of case you're making and whether or not you're gonna win that or do well on the basis of that case. So that's number one reason. What is the second reason? The second reason is awareness. So here's the thing, right? Right now, probably many of you are thinking कि यार मेरे को ये नहीं लग रहा that I am born to be a debater. This is an extremely tedious process. Identification, burden identification, respond, rebuttal, 30-minute में prep, 25-minute rather prep, etc. And probably many of you are thinking about quitting and looking at these sessions as seemingly pointless. But here's the thing. The decision that you're probably contemplating upon right now is always going to be premature, because you still haven't been exposed to the other side of parliamentary debating, which is the process of adjudication, which is the process of which is the part where you get to become an adjudicator. Because parliamentary debating or your participation in parliamentary debating is just not contingent upon you participating as a debater. It's also equally about you being an acclaimed adjudicator, because for the survival of the circuit in general, without good adjudicators, circuit cannot thrive. It's simply going to die down, right? Suppose you have 100 brilliant debaters, but you have only 2 good adjudicators in the entire circuit. What ends up happening is that for every 1 good debater, you have 0.02% or you have 0.02 good adjudicator, which means that the verdicts that come out in a circuit like this are extremely erratic, are extremely pointless, which means that these good debaters start losing interest in the activity because they realize that their potential is not being recognized. They are not being edged by credible legitimate people, legitimate adjudicators. At that point in time, therefore, we can't stress upon it enough how important adjudicators are in general, not only for the circuit, but this session is important for you so that you can make up your mind with respect to through which way you want to enter this field. While we came into the circuit, or while we started debating, we were unanimously familiarized with the concept of debating first and then adjudication. It took me a complete semester to even understand how the process of adjudication works. I was extremely terrified of the process. I felt like it was something alien, which is not for me, but that's complete bullshit. And which I've realized over the last year that this is not alien. This is just an extension of what we already know, and that's about it. So this session, again, for the second reason as to why this session is important, because it's going to give you clarity with respect to how you want to go ahead and participate in parliamentary debating. In what capacity do you want to go ahead and participate or exist in this circuit, right? Thirdly, uh, legendary debaters, if I am to assume that that's the status that you want to reach after a point in time, can take two journeys or two roads to that particular destination. Either you start as a debater, you practice, you fail, you retrospect, you learn, you improve, and you shine. Or you start as an adjudicator, accumulate knowledge, accumulate understanding, and then switch over to debating, and then use that accumulated knowledge in the debate rooms to shine and utilize that sort of knowledge and understanding to beat every possible debater that you have. This is probably going to go online, therefore I can't name those people, but one of them is from Delhi University itself, another is currently in Jindal University. These are, or थर्ड पर्सन भी बोल सकता हूँ मैं, ILNU जो भी है. The point I'm trying to make here is that I know debating legends who didn't start in a conventional sense of starting as debaters, but they started off exclusively as adjudicators, gained proficiency in the trade, and then just didn't stop there. Then they made the switch to debating, and what a find they have been to the circuit as a whole. All of them, if I'm to say. So this is why adjudication becomes so important in for you as well, because imagine this, right? You adjudicate at one tournament, 6 rounds, say 6 motions, 2 sides. You already have a knowledge bank of 12 cases. Do 3 tournaments like this in a month or over a spread of 3 months, and you have a bank of 36 cases, which means that a bank of 18 debates or 18 motions in general, which if you ever decide to switch to debating, you can use to substantiate your own case or build your own case for that matter. Therefore, the third reason primarily then becomes that adjudicating or adjudication in general helps you create a vast bank of knowledge, which always helps you if at a point in time you want to switch over to debating, or even if you don't, like, you can always continue to exist as an extremely specialized and effective adjudicator. But if at all you want to, if at all you feel like, yaar, mera improvement nahi ho raha debating mein, what do I do? This is what you do. You edge at a few tournaments, you gain exposure, you gain knowledge, you gain understanding, you listen to the best debaters across the world, you adjudicate their debates, and you accumulate all of that knowledge and make a comeback, use that knowledge and shine. So this is the third reason as to why adjudication is extremely important for you guys to be subjected to at this point in time. With clarity um, on that, let's start with this presentation in its most detailed manner, right? Right. So the process of adjudication. Number one, I've already told you who an adjudicator is. Adjudicator decides the verdict of a particular debate. They score the speakers. They get scored in turn also. But this is primarily who the adjudicator is. What is an adjudication? Adjudication is basically you as a judge of a particular debate coming to the conclusion as to who has won a particular debate, uh, contingent on number of things: role fulfillment, burden fulfillment, motion ka burden, speaker style, speaker mannerism, the quality of the debate, etc., etc. So basically the process of you coming to a conclusion as to who wins a particular debate is what is an encompassing the process of adjudication. An additional feature of this process, an extension, this process cannot be complete if I don't mention the part where you need to deliver feedbacks as well, right? What do feedbacks look like? A feedback and adjudication feedback is simply one where you inform the teams as to why one team won over the other and what are the reasons for that, what to include and what to not include in that adjudication feedback is something I'm going to come to in a minute. But for now, this process of deciding a particular winner and enlisting and repeating and enlightening the teams basically about the reasons behind the same decision is what encompasses the process of adjudication. What are the expectations from an adjudicator, right? When you walk into a debate room as an adjudicator, what are the teams expecting from you? There are three things. One, they expect you to be unbiased. That's simple to understand, right? When I say unbiased, and matlab basically you shouldn't be biased, I don't mean simply in terms of bias in favor of a particular team, but your bias can even stem from pre-existing notions, from pre-existing biases towards a particular line of argumentation, towards a particular side in a particular motion, etc. These are biases which can arise or exist within you. The expectation from you as an adjudicator at all points in time when I'm debating is that, you know what, you are going to be able to leave those biases aside and make a decision simply on the basis of what has happened in the debate, and that only, nothing else outside what from the outside world should affect your particular decision, and it should only and only be driven by what you have heard both sides argue. Second expectation is honesty. Like, we know people who have the ability to lie in their verdicts with respect to why they gave the debate to a particular side over the other. uh, and that's a great trait for those who have it, amazing. But what it does is that it very gradually corrodes the interest of genuine enthusiasts from the process. What it does is that if you are not honest in your adjudication, and if you're genuinely you're genuinely uh, creating a problem or an issue for someone who is an enthusiast in a particular who's an enthusiast in the activity, and over the same thing's been happening to them, they're simply going to lose interest, right? Then and just and not just this at this in this altruistic sense, but also for you that's a bad thing, because teams are not dumb. Unless you're adjudicating to really bad teams, they are always going to figure out whether or not your decision is honest or not. At a point in time, they realize your decision is not honest, and you're clearly being a hypocrite or dash dash dash. They are not going to mark you well, they're not going to take it well, and that's going to reflect in the poor scores that you get from them. And at a point in time, you are competing in a tournament also to win prizes in the adjudication department. That's not going to fit well, or that's not going to align with your interest either. So you have to be honest, right? Thirdly, you need to be extremely attentive with respect to what has happened in the debate. We have been in debate rooms where the adjudicators have dozed off by reply or dozed off by the whip speeches, and they have been marked extremely poorly for those things. Because again, as I said, when you go into the room, there are two things that you need to do. As I said, right, like all of us have said, debating is an extremely is a to and fro activity. You as a debater is trying to communicate with the adjudicator when you are debating. Similarly, you as an adjudicator, you are trying to communicate with the teams when you're giving them the feedback or trying to make them understand why they won or why they lost. At a point in time you're doing that, your agenda at the end of the day is to convince them about the verdict that you have delivered. At a point in time you're doing that, and let's say that the verdict is not in favor of a particular team, they're going to be extremely critical of whatever you have told them, because they don't like the fact that they have lost. And what if it's a crucial round and stuff like that, right? Therefore they're going to be extremely nitpicky with respect to the things that you say in their adjudication feedback. They're going to ask you questions, and at a point in time you're not able to satisfactorily give those answers, they're going to mark you poorly. How do you ensure that you respond to questions in a good manner or in a convincing manner? There are a number of things that come into or like play into this decision, but one thing which is a necessary condition for you being able to convincing is that you be attentive and you be mindful of the questions that are being thrown at you. There will be instances where you're asked a question and you probably weren't attentive, and then therefore you don't know what the answer to that question is, or you don't know what they're talking about, and they'll catch you onto that and they'll mark you poorly, because they'll be like, अरे तुमने तो सुना ही नहीं, तुमने कौन सा डिसीजन दे दिया, किसको, तुम्हारा डिसीजन गलत है, मैं नहीं दे रहा तुमको स्कोर. There will be situations like these, and this is like I'm speaking from an incentive point of view. Speaking from an altruistic point of view, I think it's extremely disheartening if I am losing a debate because the adjudicator has not been attentive. I have spent an hour trying to convince you, simply asking one thing in return, your attention. If that's something that you can't give me, and because of that lack of attention I have lost this debate, I'm going to be extremely heartbroken, and so are you if you lose in a similar situation. Therefore, from an altruistic level, it's really frustrating to be in a room with an adjudicator who's not attentive. So please don't do that. Let's be nice in this circuit and let's be nice to each other, right? So therefore, these are the three expectations that I have from you as an adjudicator. If I'm sitting in a room where you are adjudicating the debate, I want you to be unbiased, I want you to be honest, and I want you to be attentive, like to the fullest, these three things, right? Okay. So what to do in an adjudication feedback, right? Right. I've divided into two parts, right? I'm gonna talk to you about first what to do, the do's of adjudication, always make it a point to blah blah blah, and the don'ts, actively refrain from. So let's start with the do's first. But before the do's and don'ts, let's get a slightly better idea as to what an adjudication feedback is. You people already have an idea with respect to what an adjudication feedback is by the virtue of the fact that we already have you fill two feedbacks. We have already had you fill two feedbacks for two mocks, that the links of two mocks that we have sent you, or have you spectate. But beyond that, what comprises of a feedback is basically your idea as to why a particular side won over the other. The things that you include in that can be like wide ranging, right? They can include things from burden recognition, burden fulfillment, clash identification, resolving a particular clash, or better analysis, or better idea, and whatnot. There can be n number of things that you think a particular side won the debate on the basis of, and that's exactly what you're trying to convey to them in an adjudication feedback. The process of preparing an adjudication feedback is one where you have a certain crux ready, right? Which means that you already, as a part of the sessions which were conducted before this session, we have already told you what are the kind of requirements of a particular speaker. We have told you what are the requirements for a particular motion. We have told you what are the requirements of a particular argument. What are the requirements of a particular rebuttal, etc., etc., etc. Which means that we have already given you information with respect to what is the ideal way to debate. As an adjudicator and in your adjudication feedback, you just need to decide and convey who did that better. basically all the roles and responsibility of a debater that we've already told you about in the previous sessions are now your responsibility to sit and judge who carried out better and thus award the debate to them, and then explain to the teams why you thought that one particular side did that job better than the other based on the existing metrics that you already know. Therefore, when you come to this particular session, it's extremely important that you have clarity with respect to the metrics that we've already talked to you about, which go into deciding whether you're winning a debate or not. This session is not necessarily about giving you the metrics on which you adjudicate a particular debate, a particular motion, a particular clash, etc., etc. All that knowledge has already been given to you. This session is primarily about how you identify those burdens, how you award those burdens, and what you focus on in your feedback in general. So that's what the session is about. That's what an adjudication feedback needs to be about. That's how you go about preparing an adjudication feedback, right? I'll give you a very simple example. I'll just walk you through the way I prepare my adjudication feedback. So while the debate is happening, I keep a record of whatever a particular side, a particular speaker is arguing. Say PM said this, LO said this, DPM said this, DLO said this, and I keep a record of those things. And while while the debate is progressing, I start making notes as to what I think are developing clashes within the debate, and I start marking them on a separate page, right? This house prefers, no, this THP is this house prefers and not this house promotes, right? Okay, coming back to the process. So I start writing down what I think are the potential clashes in the particular debate, and and I basically create a box sort of a thing. And on one side, I point out what the government side is arguing within that particular clash, what the opposition side is arguing within that particular clash, and my thought as to why one side won that clash over the other. And by the end of the debate, what I have in my hand is a list of similar boxes where I have on top the name of the clash that box belongs to, and at the bottom I have why I have given that clash to the one side over the other, on what metric, etc., etc. So by the end of the debate, I have this list of tables with me. All that I need to do then in the 5 minutes or 7 minutes that I get to like prepare my feedback is to just place them in a particular order, whichever fits me. I'll probably place one particular clash over the other, etc., etc. And when I start my feedback, I pronounce the verdict, and then I move on a clash to clash basis, explaining why one particular clash was won by one particular side, and at the end, therefore, concluding as to why, on the basis of the overall clash uh, clash success wala metric, one side won over the other. Now, I'm pretty sure that you might be assuming that, let's say I have a list of 9 clashes, and one side has won 5 and the other side has won 4. Therefore, automatically the side with 5 clashes has won the debate. Like, duh, maths. But no, right? That's not the case. As I have previously remarked, and like all of us have at multiple points, clashes differ in importance to a particular debate. Clashes, you might lose 9 clashes which have developed in a particular debate, but you have won the most important clash in the debate, which might be the most important thing in this debate. Therefore, even if you have lost 9 clashes, the point at which you have won the most important clash, you win that debate. Therefore, when you decide who wins a particular debate, you have to do 2 things. Sure, you need to go ahead and see which clash is what won by which side, but you also need to realize as an adjudicator as to which clash is more important to that particular motion with respect to what that motion expects the people in the debate room to argue in favor or against the motion. So that then becomes an overview of what the process of adjudication looks like. Right. Let's come to the do's and don'ts of it, right? So the first idea is that you need to have prior clarity about, number one, the debate or the trade-off demanded by the motion. Uh, yeah. So the example here is this house believes that art should be seen as inherently democratic. before I move on to um, what I'm before I move on to explaining what I'm why this particular motion is there in the slide, I want you people to think about what this motion is about and what do you think the motion expects either side to argue. Basically, tell me in the chat or like probably just mention your name. I'll ask you to unmute and stuff. I want you to tell me, take a couple of minutes, and I want you to think and tell me what this debate is about. What is proposition going to argue in this debate? What is opposition going to argue in this debate? Or simply, what is the motion trying to say? Either of the two things. You can either like type it out in the chat or just uh, just volunteer with your name in the chat, and I'll ask you to unmute and you can say it over the mic. Anything works. Political orientation, no. Anyone else? Right. Right. Slightly complex motion. It's absolutely understandable why you won't try to have a guess at it. Art should be relatable to the people. I mean, not exactly, right? Not exactly. So this is a slightly more complex motion that I have come across. I had come across this motion when I was in the second semester of my debating college, college debating. एक second. Art invites you in presenting ways of life different sources and empathy required. No, no. So here's the thing. This is exactly why I included this motion, right? So as I was saying, this is a particularly complex motion which I came across in my second semester. And this took me a while to gauge as to what's happening. And I was adjudicating at this tournament, and I had my qualms about what this motion was trying to say, and I did all that I could to reach out to people, my fellow judges, the core adjudicators, my seniors, to just get a clarity of what's being talked about in this motion, because I didn't want to make a blunder out of it and award a win to a wrong side in the debate that I was supposed to adjudicate in, say, 15-20 minutes. But having said that, what is this motion exactly about? And Dhruv, you got the motion right, right? That is exactly what this motion is about. The word democratic here has nothing to do with the institution of democracy. This inherently democratic means inherently accessible, inherently when you say that this a particular piece of art is inherently democratic, what it means that that particular piece of art is open to interpretation as many there exists. For example, if I say that this photograph is inherently democratic, what I'm trying to say is that this photograph is open to interpretation of n number of people in n number of ways, and there is no objective reality to that one photograph. So basically, inherently democratic goes ahead and says that the interpretation can be absolutely subjective. I might view this photograph as saying this thing, you might view this photograph of saying that thing. That is what I mean when I say inherently democratic. The opposite of this is objective standard, obviously, right? What does objective reality mean? Objective reality would mean that if I paint a particular photo and I say this is what this particular photo means, you can't go ahead and say, this, I don't think that this is what it means. What I think it actually means is this. Which means that a photo with a piece of art with an objective standard is not open to interpretation. Therefore this particular motion, when you read this was believed that art should be seen as inherently democratic, what this motion expects side proposition to defend is a world where art is seen as, the interpretation of art is allowed to be subjective rather than objective. Therefore defend a world where different people can claim different meanings or different interpretations of a piece of art, versus a world where a particular author, a particular artist says that this is what my art means, and no one else can interpret it in their own manner. So this is what this motion is about, right? The reason as to why this motion is particularly important, or like why I've included it in this slide, is because this motion is like testimonial to the point I want to make when I say that you must have clarity with respect to what is the debate about in a given particular motion, what is the trade-off inherently in that given motion. If you don't have that understanding, then you are more likely to award a particular win to the wrong team without even knowing as to what the reason is. You are particularly going to be cross-questioned to a great extent. You're probably going to score really poorly, and you're going to lose your chances of succeeding in the future rounds. All this means, all the point that I'm trying to make is that before starting a particular round, before starting a particular debate, make sure you have clarity with respect to what is the debate, or what is the difference, what are the different stances that both sides are being required to take as per the motion. So that's point number one. That's the most important thing that you need to keep in mind. Secondly, the motion type. We have already had a session with respect to one where Akshat has talked to you in great detail about what are the different motion types and what are the different burdens that the motion, different motions put on respective sides. And that's something as an adjudicator also you need to keep in mind. For example, this house believes that there should be creation of a separate living space for disenfranchised citizens of respective countries, versus this house will create a separate living space for disenfranchised citizens of respective countries. I We can probably go ahead and like take answers with respect to what you think the respective cases are going to be, but that's not what I'm trying to do here. All that I'm trying to do here is point out that seemingly similar motions, both of them, they're both talking about the same thing. They both require the government to defend a world where they're going to create a separate living for disenfranchised citizens of a particular country. But the manifestation or the burden on proposition in both motions are extremely different. In the first motion, this house believes that, as Akshat has pointed out, this house believe that motion, the burden on proposition is principal justification, which means that all that the government has to do is to defend why you need to go ahead and create such a word, and that's all that they need to do. But when you read the second motion, this house will create a separate living, the burden of the proposition is not just to go ahead and defend why you think such a creation needs to happen, but you also need to defend the flaws which come with the realization of that fantasy, which means that now the burden of actualization and implementation is also upon you. What does this mean? This means that in the first motion, this house believes that motion, opposition can't say things like, but this is infeasible, but law and system kya hoga, what will this new country look like, XYZ things. Opposition can't do that in a this house believes that motion, because the burden on proposition is never to show you what this world looks like, or never to go ahead and defend the cost which might arise out of this new world. But in a this house will motion, these questions can be raised by opposition, and they can say things like, oh my god, what is the law situation going to be like, what is the economy going to be like, etc., etc. Now this is the basic difference between a this house believes that, this house will motion, and this difference is something that you as an adjudicator need to have. This difference is something which you need to have in mind. This difference is something which you need to have clarity about when you enter a particular debate room. Or else what might end up happening is that, this house believe that motion, you give the debate to side opposition, because despite proposition fulfilling their burden, you thought that they also had to defend, or they also had to answer the question as to what happens to the economy of this particular nation. This is a particular scenario which needs to be prevented at all cost, for the sake of fairness of the outcome, plus the sake of your um, own verdict, etc. So this is the second thing that you need to keep in mind. What is the motion type? What exactly does the burden on either side look like, and what are the allegations, and what are the questions that either side can ask each other? I hope you have clarity with respect to these things. In case you don't, again, this particular session which we are having right now needs you to have clarity with respect to the things that have happened before, right? This session is not about explaining to you in detail what is the difference between this house believe that and this house will that. Akshat has already done that. So in order for you to like understand, or all that you are going to get from this session is to realize that मेरे को ये difference पता होना चाहिए, but ये difference क्या है? For that you need to see Akshat's video in great detail, which is out there for you to consume. um, they can be many everyone different view. Correct. Thank you guys for all your efforts, but now we'll have to leave for Hindi Debate Society interview. Thanks once again. Thank you, Sharad. So the opposition needs to defend that art is objective. Absolutely, that is what the burden in opposition is. The number one, they need to defend a world where art is objective, because that's the counterfactual. If art is not subjective, it has to be objective. There are no two ways about it, right? There's not a third way. There's no possibility for third world unless you can dream about, unless you can like manufacture something. I don't think there is a third possibility. I think the only two possibilities are either one where art is subjective, either or one where art is objective. So if proposition is defending a world where art is inherently subjective, opposition needs to defend a world where art is inherently comes with an objective standard and objective definition and objective interpretation, right? So that's what the opposition has a burden to do. With respect to the motion type, I've talked to you about motion type, but there's a slight clarification that I'd like to point out with a particular statement I made beforehand. I said that in a this house believe that motion, opposition can't raise questions like, but what will happen to the economy, and what will happen to the legal system, etc., etc. I think that these questions, whether or not they should be entertained, depend heavily on the kind of manner in which these questions are being made. If these questions are raised by opposition simply to point out inefficiency, this state cannot be actualized because ABC problems, then it's not supposed to be taken into account. Because whether or not such a state is possible to exist is not a question that this debate wants you to answer. All this debate wants you to answer is this a state which should exist or not? Is it possible to exist? Not a question that is being asked in this debate. That question is being asked exclusively in the second motion, this house will create. However, the way you can still ask these questions on opposition, even in this house believes that motion, is if you say that, look, sure, principal justification karna hai hame, sure, hame principal opposition karna hai, sure, hum karenge. So this is my concern. My concern is that if you create a world like this where like people can do whatever bad shit they want to do, they might end up killing each other. They might end up creating a world where really powerful people have a huge monopoly over resources, and in the absence of a well-defined economy, in the absence of like law, in absence of rules, regulation, legal system, etc., you'll end up in a world where people will be in utter chaos, because only the powerful will be in power, and everything that you ran away from is replicated there, and even like in a much worse manner, because there is no force to contain these problems there. So if this is something that I want to raise, I can on opposition. Because here, what I'm trying to do through the same argument is not to show that such a state is possible or not possible. What I'm saying is, chalo, even if that sort of state is possible, here are still the concerns which might be related to the people who are living with in that particular new place, the stakeholders in this debate. And because at the end of the day, this debate is about the welfare of these stakeholders, my concern falls within the purview of a this house believes that motion. I can argue this even if this is not a this house will that motion. If you get this quality of clarity from opposition with respect to why they are saying things like this, you are very much welcome to go ahead and award them this debate if they're able to do this successfully at a point in time, the caveat being that they being able to successfully do this. So as I said, you need to have great clarity with respect to what exactly the debate requires the sides to defend and what exactly the sides are trying to say. At the point it is within the realms of the requirement, great. At a point in time it's not, it's your responsibility to reprimand that side for that. Okay, let's go to the third thing then. Blah blah blah. But everyone has a right to vote. So who are ones disenfranchised? So by disenfranchised, we don't mean people who don't have the right to vote. What we mean are people who are basically who are marginalized people who necessarily, even if they have access to vote, necessarily are people who can't fruitfully use that right to vote. Maybe because of lack of option. Maybe because of other things. Maybe because of things like poverty, etc., etc. The people who either actually lack that right, or people who are who fail to manifest or who fail to utilize that sort of right. I think this is also fair to say that not all people have a right to vote, right? If you go and look at countries like United States, where a huge population comprise of immigrants, etc., waiting for the citizenship to come into effect year after year. Those are people who are still living there, still contributing to the economy in a manner or so, but there still are people who haven't been awarded citizenship, and therefore they are still people who are disenfranchised in the literal sense of the word. But that's like getting into the literal part of it. When we use the word disenfranchised in the debating community as a whole, we don't mean it in the literal sense of the idea. What we're trying to hint at is marginalized communities, marginalized individuals, etc. Right? Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. The third. This also good. Right. So the third thing that you need to be clear about, the dichotomy slash binary. This is an extremely important thing, right? I've talked to you about this when I was taking my session on rebuttal and argument. I'm again talking about this while in the adjudication part of it. There are two examples that I've thrown at you, right? This house prefers world A over world B, and second example is this house regrets glorification of democracy. Here, in the first motion, there is a clear binary. Proposition has to defend A, opposition has to defend B, because these are the wordings of the motion that are crystal clear. There exists a binary between A and B. Opposition in this motion can't say, "Arey, nahi, nahi, nahi. A to bad hi hai, but I'll defend C." That you can't do. If you're saying A is bad, great, but you also have to say why B is good. So that's a clear binary within that. In the second motion, which was regrets glorification of democracy, there is no binary in this case. It's not like if proposition is regretting democracy, they're suddenly supporting dictatorship. Which means that in this motion, opposition can't stand up and say, "Arey, how can you regret democracy? Does that mean that you're supporting dictatorship?" No, I'm not, right? I'm open to n number of things. I can take n number of stances, but democracy, that's what my burden is in this debate. So if you're an adjudicator in a room adjudicating this round, this house regrets glorification of democracy, and opposition is like, "Wow, but then you have to defend dictatorship," and proposition refuses to defend dictatorship, and in your verdict you say that, "I give this debate to opposition because you know what, proposition refuses to defend dictatorship, although they're regretting democracy," you're probably going to get a -1 if possible in that round, because that's absolutely not a burden that you were supposed to charge proposition with. So again, the third most important thing that you always need to keep in mind is with respect to whether or not there actually exists a binary in the debate, right? Apart from these things, you should also check for speaker role fulfillment, which means that you should always have clarity with respect to what needs to come where. If suddenly in government whip you get clarity with respect to what propositions model looks like and you end up rewarding it, again a -1 on your feedback from the teams. So that's something that you can't. Similarly, if say a definition challenge, instead of being raised in LO, it's being raised in opposition whip, and you still end up rewarding it, again, you're gonna get goofed up. So these are things again you need to keep in mind. There are when I say check for speaker role fulfillment, there are two purposes here. One is for like when you because one is for like scoring speakers. That's also a part of an adjudicator. That's also a part of the adjudication process. It's not just about going ahead and deciding who wins the debate. It's also about giving people scores on the speeches that they have delivered, and this scoring is contingent on the speaker role fulfillment. Okay, has the PM laid out the model? Has the PM clarified the burden? Has the PM clarified who the stakeholders are, etc., etc.? किया है तो great, good speech, इतने number. Has the oh wow, DPM ने extend नहीं किया के shit, then तो कम number. Opposition whip में नया matter आ रहा है, कम number. These things basically. So that's something that you need to check for the sake of scoring speakers, but secondly also for like deciding the verdict and coming to a legitimate conclusion. It's also important there to keep a track of what's coming where. Things can't arbitrarily turn up in places where they're not supposed to, and you are supposed to be cognizant enough, to catch when something like that happens. So that's your fourth thing, that you need to make a point to check speaker role fulfillment. And lastly, you need to identify all clashes, principle and practical. In a principle motion, in a this house believes that motion principle is extremely important, but many a times practical in itself can be a big principle. Because if I'm on a particular side and argue that, look, uh, our practical benefits are extremely important in this debate, because these practical benefits impact the welfare of the stakeholders in this debate, which has to be, and the welfare of the stakeholder is the biggest principle behind any action which is taken on either side. And therefore, for that purpose, all my practical benefits should also be considered under principal benefits with respect to, this house believes that motion. That's something that you can always do on opposition. And as an adjudicator, you can also reward them for putting it that way. But let's say that in a this house will motion, all that I do in the motion where the motion that we already discussed, let's say this house will create a separate living space for disenfranchised citizens of respective countries, right? If in a motion like that, all that I've done on proposition is say things like, why is it needed, what good will it do, what is the justification, etc., etc. But I have like not given you a model. I have not told you how this world is going to look like. I have not told you how this world is going to function. I have not told you what the government or the economy and stuff like that is going to look like in this place. Basically, I have not given you any sort of specification whatsoever. Then I haven't fulfilled my responsibility. I haven't fulfilled my burden on proposition, because my burden was not just to give you a principle justification, my burden was also to give you a practical justification. So these are things that you need to keep a track of, and you need to recognize as and when they happen. I have already given you an overview as to what I do with respect to identifying clashes and marking them. And in the time that I get for the 7 minutes after the debate that I get to prepare my feedback, I go through them and I mark them in the order of importance of that particular clash in the particular debate, and on the basis of that I award the particular team. So that's something that you should also do by the end of the debate. When you have a list of clashes, you should go through them and try to make sense of which clash is more important than the other, and who won that more important clash, and why therefore a particular side won. And in a similar fashion, exactly the way you understood that particular verdict, deliver it to the team and explain to them why the particular verdict was reached upon. Right. So that's with the do's of um, adjudication. Let's come to the don'ts, right? So before that, blah 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 blah. Before that, if you people have any questions, I'll take them now. I'll wait for like a couple of minutes, I guess. Again, if you want to speak, if you want to unmute yourself, just type in your name. Yes, Chirag, go ahead.
Hello, Via. I needed to ask that you, in this actively refrain from, you have written that getting swayed by anything such as demeanor or language or accent. So,
Mhm.
will our demeanor or accent or personality traits provide us an edge over our competitors? But here you are saying that judges should not
Yep.
pay much attention to this.
Yes, 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 yes. But I like when I asked for questions, I was particularly asking questions before this particular slide because this is still something that I'm yet to touch upon. So I'll come to this. Don't worry, I'll address this when I'm explaining this your question. But for now, I'm gonna prioritize questions which have do something to do with the slides before this one. So this was a process, right? This was a process, who the adjudicator is, what is the process like, what are the expectations that you have, what are the do's. You should have clarity about the debate or trade-off, you should have clarity about what the motion is, you should have clarity about whether or not it's a binary, and if there is, what is the binary about. You should have a clarity with respect to speaker role fulfillment, and you should have clarity with respect to identification of all the relevant clashes. भैया 2 मिनट का recap देना network problem. Right, right, sure, sure, sure. Who is an adjudicator? The person who decides who the winner of a particular debate and awards scores to you when you are a participant in the debate. What is the process of adjudication? Everything starting from listening to the debate, then to identification of the clashes, coming to a particular conclusion with respect to who wins that particular clash, who wins the particular debate, awarding particular scores to particular speakers, and then conveying the same verdict and its explanation and its justification to the teams cumulatively comprise of or cumulatively add up to the process of adjudication. They cumulatively sum up the process of adjudication. What are the expectations from an adjudicator? You should be unbiased, you should be absolutely detached from any preconceived notions, any existing biases that you may have, biases towards ideas, towards people, towards emotions, towards ideologies, etc., etc. You have to be absolutely detached from these things. You have to be 100% or honest with respect to you basing your judgment upon the debate that you witness, and their last expectation from you is to be attentive. As I said, you must make it a point to have clarity about what this debate is about. If you absolutely have no idea about what this debate is about, then like what is even the point of your verdict, what is even the point of your feedback? I think this particular thing is very relevant to some of your feedbacks that we received during the first mock and the first response sheet that we curated rather. We realized that a lot of your verdicts and justifications were absolutely detached from what the debate was about, from what the requirement was about. A lot of you had written things like, yes, 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 people should define who they are, people should not be seen as inherently good or bad, people should grow up to be what they want, etc., etc. मतलब कोई लेना देना नहीं है with respect to what that debate is about. तुमने उस पे verdict दे दिया. So that's something that you always need to keep in mind, that you know what the debate is about, and you don't end up awarding debates on the wrong ideas, on the wrong themes, or like the irrelevant, insignificant ideas. You have to have clarity about what the motion demands the sides to do. Is it a this house believes that motion? Is it this house will motion? Similar comparative I can draw between this house opposes and this house regrets, right? Akshat has already talked to you about the difference with respect to one requiring a counterfactual, the other not necessarily. मतलब वॉलंटरी तुम्हारी मर्जी है, तुम आप अपोजेस में करना चाहो तो दे सकते काउंटर फैक्चुअल, बट नहीं दोगे तो भी आई डोंट थिंक एनीवन penalizes you for that. But regret metric, जब देखा regret की हम बात करते हैं, तो you have to go ahead and provide a counterfactual on the other side. So that's there again. You have to know what the motion type is and award slash penalize teams accordingly. You need to be aware of whether or not, number one, there exists a binary, what the binary is about and to what extent that binary is relevant to the debate. You need to have clarity with respect to what speaker role requirements are and to what extent the speakers have fulfilled those roles. And lastly, you need to identify all clashes, order them in the or arrange them in the order of priority and relevance, and simultaneously based on that decide upon your verdict. So the edges are marked by the debaters. Yes, yes. What the process looks like is that after the debate gets over, the adjudicators go into a particular room, depending on whether it's a BP or an AP or an Australs, etc. But the crux of it is that after around 7 to 8 minutes, the adjudicators uh, come in either one by one. Matlab, it's one adjudicator at a time, right? So the adjudicator comes in and they deliver their verdict, they deliver their feedback, they tell you what they want to tell you in the 7 to 8 minutes that they take, and then they open the floor for questions where you can ask them as to why, about whatever queries that you may have, whatever questions that you may have. And then based on the feedback and the answers of your questions, or if no questions, then only on the basis of feedback, you submit scores for those adjudicators. क्वेश्चन दैट यू माइट हैव इज कि अरे व्हाट इफ उसने मेरे को हरा दिया था बट क्वेश्चनिंग में मैंने उसको कन्विंस कर दिया कि मैं सही था एंड वो गलत थे, फिर क्या होगा? फिर तो मतलब डिसीजन बदल जाएगा क्या? नहीं बदलेगा डिसीजन. आई एम वेरी सॉरी टू डिसअपॉइंट यू. इवन इफ यू कैन मेक द जज रियलाइज इट पोस्ट देयर फीडबैक कि दे वर wrong, it's not gonna change anything. Probably all you will end up successfully doing is making them feel guilty, nothing beyond that. So judge verdict submit होने के बाद ही adjudicators come in and give you feedback and stuff. So how many eyes are typically there for a debate? It depends. Like when the circuit was, when we operated in a predominantly Delhi circuit, it was always an odd number panel, which means that 3 or 5 or 1, etc. So that a decision can be clearly made. 3 to 1, 1 to. मतलब अगर 5 panel है तो you can have a decision, right? 3 to one side, 2 to one side. तो भी the 3 वाला side wins. But since last year, we have seen a lot of tournaments, a lot of places where we have had even number panels with the chairperson, who is usually an adjudicator with a higher score or a higher credential, etc. They get 2 votes rather than 1. So in essence, there are still 3 votes, but 2 of them are occupied by one rather, and 1 vote is for like the other person. So if it's an even numbered panel, let's say, then your chairperson will have 2 votes. So you will have like an even number of people on your adjudication panel, but the number of votes will be odd because that chairperson is going to have 2 votes for with them. So that's basically your how many adjuds are there in the debate. The question you should rather ask is how many votes there are in the debate. The number of votes are always odd. The number of people can be even or odd, right? Depending on the availability and stuff. Have you ever encountered an adjudicator who decision that didn't? Ha lol. Many a times, brother. Many a times. Too many times. Yes. Too many times. I mean, there have been situations where क्या बोलूं छोड़ो. But ठीक है, many a times we have had these situations. I mean, there's nothing that you can really do, right? All that you can do is like reflect that in the feedback that you provide for them. You can just give them a low score and justify why you gave them a low score and hope कि फिर से वो ना आए तुम्हें edge करने, and you just need to get over that and move on to the next round. I mean, there's hardly anything you can do when that happens. It's an extremely bitter experience, an extremely annoying experience. But as I said, there's hardly anything that you can do. But ये भी है कि in an idealistic sense of things, ये अगर होगा भी तो 1 out of 10 times होगा. I mean, it's not a norm, it's an exception if an adjudicator gives a wrong decision, but more likely scenario is one where they give accurate decisions, because उनको भी तो डर है ना कि अगर उन्होंने खराब verdict दे दिया, अगर उन्होंने खराब justification दिया, then उन्हें पता है कि तुम उन्हें खराब mark करोगे. Why would they want that? They are also competing at the end of the day against other adjudicators. So everyone is trying to do their best, right? It's extremely self-reliant circuit slash activity in that regard. There are enough mechanisms to ensure that the people entrusted with a particular responsibility do that efficiently. There are enough incentives and mechanisms to ensure that that happens. So again, there have been these instances, but they are exceptions, not norms. So if you want to feel like कि यार इनके साथ हमारे साथ भी होगा, but कभी कभी होगा, ऐसा नहीं होगा कि हमेशा यही हो रहा है, right? But losing team will also give a low mark. Yeah, I mean, sure. Matlab, not necessarily. If I have lost a debate and I genuinely believe that I lost the debate because yeah, the adjudicator was able to show me where I lacked, I'm not going to give them a low score. I mean, why would I? होता है, this is something known as a vindictive marking. लोग करते हैं teams. This also happens where automatically you are scored low if you give a particular debate against a particular team, but that's again an exception. People are not assholes at large in the circuit. They're good people, some are bad people, and again, if you feel like an unfair score has been awarded to you, number one, okay, let's get this out of the way. Most tournaments, the particular thing that they do is that they filter out certain low scores from your track record, right? So let's say you judged 5 rounds or 6 rounds, and what they do at the end of the day is that they drop your lowest score. Why do they do that? To account for this sort of behavior. If you're a good adjudicator and you feel like there was one round where someone really messed with your scores, this mechanism takes that into account and therefore uh, filters out that low score, which doesn't affect the rest of your performance. But in case there have been number of instances where this has happened, now this can be blamed on more on you than the other teams, because the teams have changed, you have remained constant, which means that there's something wrong with your feedback, which because of which probably you've gotten consistently low scores. So if you are a good adjudicator and you have like a bad round, there is a mechanism to take care of that. In case you're a bad adjudicator who simply wants to blame it on teams, there is no respite for you. I'm sorry. Okay. Chalo, let's move ahead. In case you have no questions with respect to this, I think it's a pretty clear thing, right? I don't think that this is a very extensive thing. At a point in time, you have clarity with respect to what's been told to you in the previous session. This is just a recap of those things. Chalo, actively refrain from. Firstly, actively refrain from getting swayed by anything but content, demeanor, language, accent, etc. Here's the thing. In the most idealistic circuit, this is 100% true. In the most idealistic circuit, content is king. If you have the best content to offer, no one, absolutely no one, is going to look at your accent, your mannerism of speaking, etc., because those things are relevant. As debaters, as people who partake in this activity and operate in this circuit, we are people who are actively rewarded for our content, and at a point in time we try to substitute this content with other things like mannerism, etc. We are penalized for the same. Therefore, we as people who operate in the circuit are conditioned to an extent to behave in a manner where we prioritize content over everything else. Does that mean that demeanor, language, accent don't matter? Yes, they do. Unfortunately, they do. In insignificant proportion, for sure. But these are still things which unfortunately can get you brownie points, because not everyone that you're going to encounter on your way are going to be idealistic adjudicators or going to be idealistic people who blindly only see content. Unfortunately, you're also going to go ahead and like meet people or like be adjudicated by people who do unfortunately also take into consideration things like mannerism, things like diction, speed, enunciation, and stuff like that, and they take those things into account while marking people. And while this is something that you should keep in mind when you are debating, because you want adjudicators, even if they're bad, to score you highly, you should keep that in mind. And in your speech, you should give 100% priority to content, but also keep in mind to like work a little better on your language, on your command, on your diction, pronunciation, etc. But as an adjudicator, I would highly advise you or request or beg you to to prioritize content over everything else. Because just because there is a propensity of something bad happening with you doesn't mean that when the reign is in your hand, you act badly or you act poorly. When I say that you as an adjudicator, when you are adjudicating, go ahead and please only prioritize content. What I'm trying to do here is pass on a culture where you also pass on similar culture to friends around you, to people around you, where we create a scenario, create a circuit where content is actually king. Because at the end of the day, this circuit cannot survive if we take into account these additional insignificant things, because ultimately every day we debate in a circuit or we participate in a circuit where people come from different backgrounds, different dictions, different personalities, different settings, etc. At a point in time, we start taking into consideration and like give a heavy amount of consideration to things like mannerisms, etc. We are going to go ahead and lead to the demise of this circuit, because suddenly we are not going to be accommodative, we are not going to be inclusive, because we are going to go ahead and always prioritize or reward things which we think are better. For example, if today I'm not telling you to prioritize content and not look at things like accent, etc., tomorrow probably you're going to adjudicate a debate between someone between a team from a developing country and a team from a developed world, and because you think English is such a fantastic language and that's the way people should speak, you might end up and acting upon that bias, end up giving a wrong decision to the side from the developing world. And these are biases that a lot of us have within ourselves. At a point where we begin to pay so much attention to these biases, we create an extremely suffocating and a toxic circuit to operate in. Therefore, as an adjudicator, what I request you to please do is prioritize content at all points in time. Please don't take into account things like अरे वो बोलता कैसे है, अरे वो खड़ा कैसे होता है बोलने के लिए, उसकी pronunciation कैसे, उसकी vocabulary कैसी है, मत देखो यार वो सब. It's literally not important. That's not what we are here to do. अगर वही करना होता, probably we would have been taking part in a different activity, right? So that's what this thing is about. So that's why I said that please don't take that into consideration. I think Chirag ne Chirag, can you please repeat your question? Hi Chirag, if you're
Yeah,
there.
my question was that you have written that our demeanor, and you are telling adjudicators that not to be swayed by demeanor and personality type things. So I am asking as a debater that will a personality accent give an edge over the competitors?
Right. When you're participating as a debater, as I said previously, these things might work in your favor, because you might not be facing people who are as idealistic as we want people to be. You might be being judged by people who do prioritize these things, who do give into and concede into their biases, etc. But when you as an adjudicator have the reins in your hand, what you should do is prioritize content, because at the end of the day, a debate is between two cases and engagement between those two cases. How those cases are presented in the way, the structural representation, that is all that matters. It doesn't matter if the pronunciation of the speaker presenting that case is better than someone or worse than someone. At the point in time, the quality of the argument that you get from one side over the other is better. That alone should be the metric of your adjudication. I think it's slightly it's not the most intuitive thing to hear for the first time, I'm pretty sure, because we are products of an education system which rewards things like mannerism, demeanor, etc. But this is what again sets parliamentary debating circuit apart from a lot of other arenas, because here is one circuit which tells you that, look, every other thing is immaterial. At a point in time, you can come up with a good case and defend it to its core. We are here for you and we are here to reward for you, and that's the culture that we stand for, and that is exactly what we want to propagate further as well. So the first thing that you should always keep in mind and end up not doing is prioritizing things like mannerisms over content. So that's the first thing that you should never do. Number two, you should actively refrain from upholding preconceived notions stemming from or about personal opinion, notion of ideal debates. you might have a personal opinion that, I don't know, democracy is the best form of government. That doesn't mean that you automatically give the debate to a side which says that democracy is the best form of government there exists. This is a huge possibility. This is something, a manifestation of something called as a confirmation bias. Google it up, you'll understand that this means that, for example, let's say that you have been conditioned to believe that democracy is the best form of government, or NDA is the most effective government there has been ever since our inception of an Indian independent India. The point at which that you're gonna go ahead and likely to be a part of conversation that repeat the same thing is much more than you being a part of the conversation which says something opposite or against it. Your buy-in into preconceived ideas is much more, and that is something that you need to actively refrain yourself from ending up doing. It's very natural to have yourself, to let yourself free and give out a biased decision. Again, as I said, you have to be unbiased. How do you become unbiased? You have to refrain from reflecting your personal opinions upon your verdict. Secondly, I have also said that you need to go ahead and refrain from upholding preconceived notions stemming from notions of ideal debates. Now, what does this mean? This means that, let's say let's say the debate is, the motion is, this house will eat chocolate, right? Let's say this, the motion is, this house will eat chocolate. Now, probably you as an adjudicator think that what people should argue in this debate, what proposition should argue in this debate, is how chocolate, the production of chocolate happens in areas which have extremely uh, harsh conditions for people to work in. And at a point in time, you continue consuming chocolate, you continue approving slash legitimizing that process, and therefore the eradication of that process never happens. And therefore, as a mark of protest, as a mark of legitimate protest, to give out a message to the state and like institutions and companies to stop doing this, you have to refrain from eating chocolate. Suppose this is what you want to argue ऑन ऑपोजिशन, ऑपोजिशन में तुम्हें बोलना है कि भाई गलत हो रहा है, हमें गलत को रोकना है, हम चॉकलेट खाते रहेंगे तो गलत नहीं रुकेगा, इसलिए हम चॉकलेट नहीं खाएंगे. लेट्स से दिस इज व्हाट यू थिंक इज एन आइडियल केस ऑन ऑपोजिशन. लेट्स से दैट ऑपोजिशन डजंट आर्ग्यू दिस. Let's say opposition argues that I don't want to eat chocolate because, you know what, I have limited budget and people have limited budget in general. Chocolate is unhealthy, and like people end up spending a huge chunk of their budget on chocolates, hypothetically speaking, and therefore this actively leads to a point where they deprioritize other essentials of their lives. And therefore I think that this addiction is something that needs to be tackled from right from the state ka level, and therefore I refuse to eat chocolate, and therefore as an individual, I choose not to eat chocolate. Okay? At that point in time, you as an adjudicator might feel like कि यार इसने तो वो नहीं बोला जो मुझे लगा था सही है. At that point in time, you might feel yourself be like कि यार, does it mean that the opposition has done a bad job? It hasn't. Just because the opposition hasn't argued something which suits your idea of an ideal case doesn't mean that the opposition is subjected or should be subjected to an automatic loss. Till the point in time opposition in a particular debate or any side in a particular debate is able to do a sufficiently decent job of beating the other side, regardless of what their idea is, or regardless of whether or not your idea is consistent with what they have argued, your verdict should not be reflected, or your verdict should be only and singularly based on whether or not that side has been able to beat the other side. Your decision then shouldn't be overshadowed by the doubt of अरे पर उसने वो तो नहीं बोला जो मुझे लगा था कि ये बोलना चाहिए. Doesn't matter. तुम्हें लगा था वो कोई और डिबेट होगी, कोई और कॉन्टेक्स्ट में शायद कोई बोल लेगा, but that absolutely doesn't mean that you penalize that particular side for not reiterating what you thought was the ideal case. So that is again something what you also need to actively refrain from. Next, you have to refrain from crediting assertions. If I go ahead and say that democracy is bad, what is it? Is it an assertion? Yes, it's an assertion. Should you credit it? No, you should not credit it. But if I say democracy is bad because A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, should you now credit it? Sure, because now it's not just an assertion. I've given you a structural analysis of why democracy is bad. At any point in time, please make sure that you don't end up crediting assertions which might be really it might be antithetical to your chances of doing well in the future, because teams are going to understand if you have created an assertion or not. Because at a point in time, let's say that you have bought a particular assertion and you have included that in your feedback, and the other side goes like, "Arey, but उसने ये analyze कहाँ करा?" And you will be like, "Oh shit, वो तो नहीं करा, but चलेगा यार, मतलब I bought their idea." They're going to penalize you extremely badly, because you have ended up giving, or like you have ended up giving a verdict against them on a basis of an assertion, which is the worst that you can probably do. Okay, you should actively refrain from buying late dump. अगर proposition का entire नया material गवर्नमेंट विप में आ रहा है और आप उसको क्रेडिट कर रहे हो, एंड उस मटेरियल के बेसिस पे आप ऑपोजिशन टीम को बोल रहे हो भाई यू लॉस्ट, देन you have lost your chances to do well in future, because you're going to be penalized काफी ज़्यादा, right? So that's again something, as soon as I say buying late dump, this should in your head take you back to the sessions that you've already been subjected to, and how you have been told that certain material cannot come in DPM or DLO, government, GovWhip, OpWhip, reply speeches. Some things which can exclusively come in proposition, like the first speeches, or something which can exclusively come in second speeches, no later, etc. And therefore these are things that you need to be extremely mindful about when you are deciding who has won a particular debate. Then you should actively refrain from completing links of analysis for either side or speaker. This is an extreme, this is really interesting. I'm going to get into this in a moment, but let's look at the chat for now. But what if the thing that we imagine that this should have said is an important assertion, then how should we go about it? Advait, can you unmute yourself, brother?
Yes, Pratyush.
Yeah, can you please explain your question?
Yeah, so I'll give it through an example. Like the debate which was recorded, which was sent to us for the adjudication, like for the feedback form, right? So there, I felt as a PM, Matthew should have also mentioned that what their model proposes to give in future, like what sort of an idealistic society are they really thinking of?
Okay.
So I thought that was missing, and I did mention that in that feedback form as well. So how do we account to such things? Like
Right. So here's the thing, right? You can remain unmuted, right? We can have an interaction. ऐसे कोई दिक्कत नहीं है.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the thing. We can divide this into two scenarios. One, where your concern with unfulfillment of a particular, absence of a particular idea has to do uh, with the technical requirement of particular motion, and one case where there is no correlation between your expectation and technical requirement of the motion. In the first case, where you say that array us par matlab the PM should have given a model of what this is going to look like. Now, this is a legitimate concern for an adjudicator to have and penalize the team upon in the absence of this fulfillment, because this is not your own expectation, your own imagination. This is an expectation of the motion. This is a requirement of the motion, that in this house will motion, PM has to go ahead and give you a model as to how things are going to look like. Therefore, at a point in time, you choose to go ahead and penalize the team for that. You're absolutely justified in doing that, because you know what, you're just abiding by the requirement of the particular motion which you're adjudicating. Therefore, you're absolutely justified in that regard. But in the second scenario, where probably you say that your expectation is beyond the technical requirement of a motion, however important it is, you cannot penalize the team for the absence of that. Let's say your idea, which was ki, but I thought that model hona chahiye tha. Let's say this house believe that motion. Let's say this house believe that motion, where all that the side had to do is justify why the existence of a certain thing is good. But you, as an adjudicator, were like, yaar, but अगर थोड़ा बता देते कि ये होगा कैसे तो और अच्छा होता, तो चलो 75 का 74 कर देते. That doesn't work. Your expectation has to be consistent with the requirement of the motion. At a point in time, then the way you address your own expectation is you ask yourself, यार मेरा expectation technical requirement के दायरे में है या नहीं है? मतलब is it something which the motion also expects them to do? Yeah, it's a separate concern that I have. If it's this latter, then you can't do anything about it. You can't penalize teams upon that, because that's something that I'm gonna come to in a minute, where you see this in red, getting constructive wala thing. I'll talk about this in greater depth. But the crux of the matter is that if your expectation is consistent with the requirement of the motion which the team is not fulfilling, go ahead, penalize them. But if that is not the case and your expectation is beyond the requirement of the motion, and this is something extra that you're expecting from them, you can't really do much about it. मतलब तुम एक disappointing debate देखोगे, उससे ज़्यादा तुम उसके में कुछ नहीं कर सकते. You shouldn't ethically reflect that upon your assessment. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, so it should be within the framework then.
Yep.
All right.
Great. I hope Sahaj, your concern is taken care of as well.
Yeah, all clear. Thank you.
Great. I want to explain this with an example. Okay, let's take this one, right? So this house will tax Zara for flouting environmental laws. Let's say proposition comes in and says that, look, and we have discussed this motion pehle bhi, right? So let's say the proposition comes in and says that, look, the world is a place where Zara is acting in a really bad manner, and we need to change that sort of behavior. How are we going to do that? Probably the way we can do that is by doing something which directly impacts their profit. And because it's a profit making corporation, that's the biggest dent that we can make in their armor and force them to mend their ways. So the way we go about doing this is that we put a tax, we tax Zara for these environmental violations. And now the only way Zara can cope with this is by either paying this tax from their own revenue / pocket, or showing this tax in the markup of their product. Which means that what Zara might as well have to do now is increase the price of their product. Like say if they were selling it at 400, they might as well have to sell it at 500 now. At a point in time, they're having to sell it at 500, and because we know that price is inversely proportional to demand, there is obviously going to be a decrease in demand. And at a point when there's a decrease in demand, obviously the message has been sent to Zara that they now see a shrink in their customer size, and that's obviously they want to prevent. And therefore, through this machinery, what you can do is that you can go ahead and make them mend their ways, because the only way they can go ahead continue operating without this loss in consumer base is by not violating environmental laws. Because the point at which they violate these environmental laws, they're going to tax Zara, they're going to have to raise their prices, and this raise in price is going to drive away customers, not something which Zara is going to appreciate. Let's say proposition argues this, right? And you as an adjudicator like, wow, amazing, एकदम सही बात है, जीत गए. ऑपोजिशन आके पूछेगा क्या कोरिलेशन है. ये कहाँ लिखा है कि the only way Zara can deal with price rise is by doing these two things? I mean, what Zara can do is cut down on its expenditure. How is it going to do that? It's simply going to go ahead and decrease the wages that it pays to its workers. It's going to spend less on the working conditions. It's going to provide lower or worse amenities to its workers, and it's going to make the working conditions even worse. Even that's a way they can cope with this tax imposition without having to reflect it on the price to their consumers. And therefore, because there is no markup in the price now, there is no subtraction in the consumer base either, and therefore the impact they're trying to reach is never met. Because the way to that impact, the way to that destination was through reduction in consumer base. That doesn't happen anymore. Let's say this, right? This is what opposition argues. But as an adjudicator, you be like कि यार नहीं यार proposition जो बोल रहा है वो तो सही बोल रहा है, because these are the only two ways you can do that, and you end up rewarding them for that argument and you end up giving that clash to them. The first thing that the opposition is going to ask you as to why did you draw that additional link for them, right? They're going to ask you as to why you drew a link for them which they didn't draw, which is to say, why did you assume that their particular idea is going to reach the destination which they haven't analyzed as to how that's going to reach? Because all that they have done is they've given you certain ideas, but they haven't proven the likelihood of that, of the actualization of that analysis. That is to say, that analysis was insufficient, and we pointed that out, but still you chose to complete that analysis by yourself for them and therefore give them the debate. How is this fair? And you're like, हाँ but नहीं सही है, मतलब they argued it, थोड़ा थोड़ा चलेगा, नहीं चलेगा, मतलब that's not something that you're allowed to do. You are absolutely not supposed to go ahead and fulfill missing links in arguments on behalf of any particular side, and on the basis of that give out debates. For, let's take another example, let's say एक second. Let's say we also right, let's say take this, right? This house regrets the glorification of democracy. Let's say proposition argues that we regret the glorification of democracy because what it does is that it harms the economy of a particular country. This is the extent of that argument. You have given the verdict on the basis of that argument, two-side proposition, and when you're asked to justify your verdict, you say that, look, the idea makes sense, right? Because glorification of democracy is bad for potential criticism, and because you can't criticize the institution anymore, you are much less likely to ever operate in a world where economic development comes at the cost of welfare of people, and at a point in time that doesn't happen. Obviously economic development is being compromised, and therefore obviously this glorification is leading to a loss of economic welfare. What you have done in the last 30 seconds is completely make up an argument for proposition, because all that you did is you saw an idea, you saw the destination, and you made up that bridge for them by yourself and credit them for that. That's a big no. And this is something you'll realize by yourself when you look at a particular argument and you ask yourself कि अरे पर ये complete किया है क्या? नहीं किया है. अगर नहीं किया है तो वो आर्ग्यूमेंट उन्हें मत दो, चाहे वो कितना ही बड़ा इम्पैक्ट हो, चाहे वो आके बोलते कि दुनिया खत्म हो जाएगी ग्लोरीफाई करोगे डेमोक्रेसी को तो, एंड इट्स द बिगेस्ट इम्पैक्ट दैट वन कैन क्रिएट, बट बिकॉज दे हैवंट, बट इफ दे हैवंट एनालाइज्ड दैट कि हाउ दुनिया खत्म हो जाएगी, प्लीज उनको डिबेट मत दो. It's ridiculous for you to do that then. So that's the idea that I'm trying to make here. As an adjudicator, you should not make up arguments for the other team, right? You should actively refrain from completing links of analysis for either side or speaker. Now, this is the most important. Actively refrain from getting constructive. What is constructive and what is reflective? This is an extremely important I want you to pay a lot of attention to what I'm about to say now. Adjudication feedback is supposed to be reflective in nature rather than being constructive in nature, which means that what you're supposed to do in adjudication feedback is reflect upon what has happened in the debate, and on the basis of that, deliver your verdict, deliver your feedback. Therefore, I say that your adjudication feedback has to be reflective rather than constructive. What is constructive? Constructive is imposing your expectation of a particular debate or your idea of what a debate should have been upon your feedback and upon your verdict. A constructive feedback looks like, yeah, I mean, proposition lost this debate because you know what, they should have said this, they didn't. I mean, obviously they lost. I mean, there are 10 things which they should have said that didn't say. I mean, duh, they lose. That's a constructive feedback. No one is going to appreciate a constructive feedback from an adjudicator ever, unless you are some dino, you are some legend from the yesteryears who has just returned to the circuit, and you will do anything to listen to their feedback. Unless that happens, as an average adjudicator, you are not supposed to be constructive in nature. Don't go ahead and offer your constructives unless asked for. Don't tell them what you think could have been argued by either side unless asked for. Always remember that reflection is the king, right? With that, having said all of that, there are certain comments that I like to make at this point. For those of you who probably went online and looked up last year's session on the one that I took this year, you would have realized that this session out there, this particular session that we're having right now, was part of the same session as like a one long session. If you listen carefully once again tonight to that session, you'll realize that I was pretty clear and adamant on your adjudication feedback not being constructive in nature. On a comparative, a year later, I'm a little flexible upon that. What do I mean by a little flexible? When I was operating in a circuit which was predominantly Delhi circuit, DU circuit, I had never seen feedbacks being appreciated which were constructive in nature for the reason that I just shared with you. But as I've seen the circuit evolve, I've seen a lot of adjudicators respected and like the average adjudicators going ahead and including constructives in their feedback. However, this is also something that you can do. But there are three things that you need to keep in mind with respect to that. Number one, I've like ordered it at number 3, but it's like, let's start with this. You can choose to go ahead and also offer constructives in your feedback, but those constructives cannot be the basis of your verdict or your feedback in general, which means that as a additional for earning additional brownie points, you might as well go ahead and at the end say like, I also thought that these are the things that either side could talk about for improving their scores or improving their margin of victory, etc. But my verdict is primarily based on this, and this is what happened in the debate. Therefore, you can offer constructives at the end to earn some brownie points, to give out this impression that you know so much, and therefore is this legitimate person who needs to be taken seriously and who needs to be awarded justly. You can always do that for that purpose. But always remember that even if you're offering constructives, your verdict cannot be based on constructives. They have to be based on your reflection of the debate that you witnessed. Then, if I'm saying that you can go ahead and offer constructives, there is certain sensibility which you need to possess to do that. You need to be very wise and smart with respect to where you are using these constructives and with who you are using these constructives. If you think that as a first year adjudicator, you can go ahead and give constructives to a 6th year debater, a world champion, they're not going to give two shits about what you have to offer, because they probably have already taken note of it, used it, grown that idea into something else entirely, and probably they don't even feel like that's a significant idea anymore, and that's why they probably haven't included that in your debate. So at that point in time, if it's someone like that, they might not even appreciate the thought of you trying to go ahead and give them constructives. It might push them the wrong way. It might nudge them the wrong way. So try not to do that. But again, if you feel like there's someone who genuinely probably can gain some help from your constructive feedback, then you can go ahead and do it with them. But as I said, if at all you choose to include constructives in your feedback, that is to say, you choose to say like what you think could have been like better additions from either side in this debate, you have to be very smart about it, and you have to be very aware of where you are doing this and with whom you are doing this, right? These are things that you need to keep in mind with respect to getting constructive. Although it's still a no-no from my end, in case you want to, these are things that you should keep in mind, right? Some miscellaneous things that you should be aware about. Firstly, margin of victory, your margin of victory is basically the difference between the two sides. Like, let's say government side has won over the opposition side, but okay, sure, but by what is the quantitative difference, or what is the notional difference between the two sides, that's determined by something we call the margin of victory. I think the term is explanatory. Your MOV can be numerical or it can be notional. Numerical MOV is basically counted by, you calculate the winning team's entire score, you sum up the scores that you've given them, you calculate the losing team's entire score, you subtract the losing team's score from the winning team's score, and you have your numerical margin of victory. Your notional margin of victory is basic, isn't particularly mathematical. It rather has a lot to do with your perception of the debate in general. It should it shouldn't be like drastically opposite to what your numerical MOV is. But having said that, it doesn't have to be exactly same as your numerical MOV, which means that I've given you a range here, right? Close margin of victory 0 to 2.5, close to clear is 2.5 to 4, clear is 4 to 8, thrash is greater than 8. So these are like numerical margin of victories. When you calculate your margin of victory and you say, and you see these numbers belonging in these intervals, you can then say that numerically the margin of victory is this or this. Your notional MOV doesn't necessarily have to adhere to the same exact number. If you are let's say it was a close to clear debate, numerically let's say it was a 3.5, but notionally you feel like, yeah, it's मतलब न्यूमेरिकली तो शायद अच्छा हो गया बिकॉज स्पीचेस अच्छी नहीं थी या स्पीचेस ज्यादा ही अच्छी थी या समथिंग, बट नोशनली स्पीकिंग it was like a close to clear but to the closer side zyada. So those things, I mean, these are things that you'll understand better when we start mocks and we start interacting with you on that level or on that platform, through that platform. But just to give you an idea of what a margin of victory is, even if you don't understand what a notional MOV is, that's absolutely fine. As long as you understand what a margin of victory is, that's absolutely good. You're absolutely good to go. Speaker scores, these are basically scores that you award to speakers. There are different ranges that are adopted by different tournaments, etc., etc. Generally it's a 69 to 81 scale, which means that the lowest score that you can offer is 69, the highest you can offer is 81. The way that we were instructed or we were trained to mark speakers were that we were asked to start at the average value. In the 69 to 81 range, it's obviously a 75, and then on the basis of the quality of the speech being offered, you go left or right, which means that if you think that's a good speech, you go rightward, you award them a 76, 77, whatnot. If you think it's a bad speech, then you don't go like 70 to 71. You can go 74, 74.5. But you should keep this in mind that a 75 is enough indication of it having been a bad speech. Generally, the way we were trained, you go ahead and award a 74, 74.5 in case a speaker has done something like not completing their time, or primarily not completing the time. If a speaker has spoken for say like 4 or 5 minutes, you give them a 74, 74.5. Unless that, you can give them a 75 and it's indication enough that it's bad. But the world has significantly changed since then, and there are manuals available which specifically give you a detailed analysis of what score indicates what. I think Akshat can share that with you on WhatsApp, and you can go through that. It's going to be an easy read. It just gives you an idea of what criteria is demonstrated by which score and stuff. So that's also self-explanatory. In case you have any doubt with that, we can always take it up with us. But having said that, I think something that you can keep in mind is that let's say it's a 69 to 81 scale and you think that it's a great speech. Even if it's a great speech, the only time at which you give someone something above a 79 is if that's the most exemplary thing that you've ever heard. Like 80 or 79 above in a 69 to 81 scale is the best that people can get. uh, so be very mindful of when you give those high speaker scores. I think that's with speaker scores then. And yeah, so lastly, just about a recap of what an adjudication edge feedback is. It's a justification of your verdict. It's a justification of your MOV. um, you start with the verdict, you tell you why and what was the margin of that victory in that particular verdict. You justify your verdict as well as you justify why you thought a debate was close or close to clear and stuff like that. Let's say that it was a particular debate where you could identify three clashes, and one side won two, the other side won one, but they won the more important one, so you gave them the debate. But you say that, you won the debate, but it's not a clear debate, it was slightly close to clear or close debate, because I thought that the other side also did really well and contest you in these other clashes. So these are things that you need to justify in adjudication feedback. What does a good edge feedback comprise of? It should be concise and thematized. You can't blabber on for 7 minutes. You need to be very thematic. You need to be very concise in what you're talking about. One, two. I want to talk about one, two, three, four, five, and you're done. You can't blabber about. No one gives a shit about your beliefs and all those things. All that they want from you is to tell you, all that they want you to do is tell them कि भाई why have we lost, बस इतना बता दो कंसाइज वे में कि कोई हारा हुआ है बंदा, उसको वैसे ही गुस्सा आ रहा है, तुम उसको बिठा के और राम कथा सुना रहे हो जो उसे पता है कि डिबेट में क्या हुआ, तुम फिर भी उसको वापस डिबेट का रिकैप दोगे, देन नॉट गोना बी इंटरेस्टेड. So it has to be really concise and thematized. Right, you should highlight which clash is the clinching factor, if any, and why. Then you should pay equal attention to both sides, that is both sides should be equally convinced. I think I have observed a lot of times where adjudicators choose to focus exclusively or concentrate exclusively on losing sides, because they're aware that there is a scope of them being vindictively marked by the losing side, so they exclusively focus more on the losing side in order to appease them. But not a great strategy. I mean, अगर मैं जीता हूँ, चलो great, amazing, but मुझे भी तो एड्रेस करो, मुझे भी तो बताओ मैं क्यों जीता हूँ, तुम उसी को एड्रेस किए जा रहे हो, तो not great, right? I also might have questions, why are you not addressing me even if I have won? So that's not something that is really great. You should, मतलब थोड़ा सा समझ में आता है if you give slightly greater priority to the losing side, but that doesn't mean that you completely negate the presence of the winning side. And lastly, you should always provide space slash time for questioning, which means that let's say you have 7 minutes 20 seconds for a allotted to you for your feedback. Keep your feedback short, like time, keep it to around like 5:30, and have the rest of the time available to them for asking you questions, because there are a lot of there are going to be a lot of times where you probably have missed something that you should have included in your feedback, and your scope to then address that also is through that question. Like, say, let's say you wanted to say A B C, but तुमसे C miss हो गया, so probably someone will ask you a question about C, and then you will have a chance to again involve and include C in your feedback as well. So keep a scope for that, and there are going to be a lot of instances where people still not going to be convinced, and the way to do that is through that question answer session. So that's also important, so you must keep time for that as well. And lastly, as I said, I was really adamant on this last year, like, don't be constructive in nature at all. This year I'm slightly more flexible, with the caveat, however, that offer constructives if you want, but don't base your verdict on your constructives. Don't base your verdict on your expectations and your imaginations and fancies in general. Just give me a couple of seconds. एक second. Yeah, right. Great. I think that's pretty much it from my end with respect to this session. I've tried to be as explanatory as possible. I've tried to keep it as simple as possible, just to give you a hang of what the process looks like, what is an ideal adjudication feedback and stuff. I think what I was trying to get at इसकी देखो you have been told कि क्या important है क्या नहीं important है while adjudicating there might be a little more things here and there which you need to keep in mind and you have this session is for that, but apart from that this session as you might have realized by now is just a recap of everything that is important and you need to keep in mind, especially as an adjudicator, but also as a debater, because at the end of the day, it's the adjudicator that you're trying to convince. It's the adjudicator जिसको तुम बोल रहे हो भाई देखो मैं सब सही कर रहा हूँ मेरे को debate दे दो, ठीक है? So that's what this session was for. I can also share this with you. This presentation with you. This cumulatively has both the sessions के presentations. You can go through them. Plus, or you can go through the recording also. It's absolutely up to you. I'm opening the floor for questions now. I'll really appreciate questions at this point because this was an important session of sorts, touched across a lot of points. It would be great if we can have an interactive session. So yeah, questions. Just naam likh do. Let's do it over mic instead of chat. Yeah, Saj, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So I had a question regarding the feedback when you have the given time. So, would it be better if we give a feedback for the opposition or the government in general, or do we have to specify which speaker we are talking about?
In general, you don't have to specify the speaker unless you think
Okay.
that someone has done an exemplary job and it only makes sense to include like quote them. Then you
Yeah.
can pay special exclusive attention to them. Otherwise, it's absolutely fine to address them as a whole.
All right, makes sense. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else? भाई तो फिर मैं क्वेश्चन पूछूं क्या तुमसे अगर तुम में से किसी को कोई डाउट वाउट नहीं है तो यस हर्ष
Yeah, I wanted to ask, like, would it be fair to deduct marks if a particular team is being passively aggressive towards the other one?
No. I mean, so here's the thing, right? Although we try to make this space as accommodative and peaceful and stuff as possible, I think it's absolutely up to the discretion of the other team to act upon it. Even and there are enough mechanisms outside the debating room and the verdict and stuff to act upon this discomfort. There are things like equity committees and stuff where these other teams can reach out to at a point in time they feel uncomfortable or they feel a certain amount of passive aggression being hauled at them. You as an adjudicator don't need to take those things into account. That again, however kind that might seem, falls under the purview of acting out of reason and acting on things beyond content. So you don't need to penalize teams for that sort of action. The teams feeling that sort of discomfort can always take that matter up with other authorities, right?
Okay, thank you.
Great. Aditya, if you can unmute yourself, that would be great. Chalo, koi na. I'll just read out the question, right? What if the losing side are not satisfied by your feedback and in the rage of losing end up giving you a low score? Does this really happen? Of course it happens. For sure it happens. Many a times you probably might be the adjudicator facing this wrath, or you might be a team displaying this rage. It can be either scenario. I have done both. Like I have been a team which has been extremely pissed with a particular feedback because I felt it was downright ridiculous and it was downright unfair, and I've marked them very poorly. I mean, simply because of the fact that even if they were trying to do their best, their understanding of the debate wasn't consistent with what I thought what a fair outcome of the debate should have been. And I am well within my rights as a debater, as a speaker, to go ahead and exercise that right to mark them poorly and display my display my dissatisfaction at the verdict and the justification. And also at the same time, I have been someone who has done everything possible to convince the side, losing side, as to why they lost, with all the right justification I could offer to them. And I have done everything to make them understand as to why they particularly failed to win that debate. But despite that, I have been marked really poorly, to an extent where in a tournament last year, I had a record of receiving a perfect score of 10 for 4 consecutive rounds, but there was one round where I got a 1 from a team, which led to an overall impact on my chances of winning any prize whatsoever. But it just went on to show that these things do happen. What happens when these things happen? You can't really do much, right? As I said, some tournaments take this possibility into account and therefore have measures like dropping low scores. Unfortunately, that tournament did not have a particular framework like that. Other frameworks include things like you reaching out to equity committees and saying that you fear being vindictively marked, and that equity committee can convey the same to the concerned authorities, and they can look into that and come to a particular decision. But if something like this happens, you can't really do much. I mean, as I said, many externalities are bound to happen in this setup where we work, but those externalities are exceptions, and likelihood is extremely less. What do you do when something like this happens? Nothing much that you can do. Great. Mhm. Great. Yeah. Anyone next? Whoever wants to go next. Yeah. Ask. I'm so sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so hi, am I audible?
Yep.
Okay, so once you understood the motion or the topic, what should be the direction of your research? For example, till now, all the motions I have read or understood, after that, I have never been able to contemplate an entire argument just based on that. So, is there a particular direction we should work or analyze it in?
Right. Yes. So this is the framework that I have followed. Um, I have followed like more often than not. Right. Once a particular motion is out with your teammates, you take 5 minutes to your individual selves and you try to write down everything that comes to mind with respect to that motion. Everything. Who can possibly be the stakeholders? Where is possibly this debate happening? Why is this debate possibly happening? What is the result this debate envisages to achieve? What are the burdens on each side? Everything that you can possibly think of. Once you have collated all of this information, once 5 minutes are up and you get back together, what you can start doing is that you start asking yourselves question. The first question you ask yourself is, okay, what is the context in which this debate happening? That is to say, why is this debate happening? For example, if I talk about this house regrets glorification of democracy, the first question I'll ask myself, acha, ये जो motion है, what is the problem in status quo, or what is the concern in status quo to solve which this particular motion is happening? The first thing that I try to do is identify the crisis which this motion is trying to solve. There is always going to be one. There is always going to be one crisis that your motion is trying to solve. The first thing I try to do is try to identify that crisis. Number one. Number two, you ask yourself as to who is this motion addressing, as to who is the stakeholder of this particular motion, who is this motion catering to. This house will tax Zara. Who is your stakeholder? The stakeholder is probably the environment, probably the people whose livelihood is contingent on the environment, probably the workers in Zara, etc. This house regrets the glorification of democracy. Who is your stakeholder? Your stakeholder is probably the people living in a democracy, are probably political parties, politicians, etc. So you can have different stakeholders. So second thing you do is try to identify your stakeholders. Third thing that you do is you try to understand what kind of impact there is on the stakeholder on either side, right? Fourth thing that you try to do is to why is the stakeholder better off on your side. That's your idea analysis, whatnot. And lastly, what you do is you try to envisage what is the end goal that you're trying to achieve. And then you spend the rest of the time trying to figure out how you are going to convince the adjudicator that that end goal, it can be achieved on your side better than the other side. That's how you go about in a motion, or you start with preparation of a case with respect to a particular motion. You first identify the crisis, you then identify the stakeholder this crisis concerns, you then try to understand what kind of impact this stakeholder is having because of this crisis on either side. Then you try to understand what is the best alternative for welfare of this particular stakeholder, and then you try to understand how that particular end goal of welfare can be better achieved on your side of the house. This becomes the crux of your case prep, of the process of your case preparation, of the 25 minutes that you have. That's one thing when you're just starting off. But after a point in time, let's say you spend 6 months, 5 months, post that, when you read a particular motion, you will naturally come up with the idea as to what this motion is about. If you had given me this motion of this house will tax Zara a year back, it would have taken me at least 10 minutes to figure out what the nuance in this motion is. If you had given me the motion of this house believes that art should be inherently democratic, it would have taken me at least 10 minutes to 15 fucking minutes at least to understand what is the motion talking about. But now, just by looking at the motion, there is a sense of intuition which I have. अच्छा, ये है debate. पर आपको ये बोलना है, आपको ये बोलना है. Now, the idea is कि कैसे हम ये जो op बोलेगा उसको हम तोड़े कैसे. That now becomes the crux of attention. So these are things at different stages how you cope with a particular motion. Something that you can probably add to the list is, in addition to everything that I said before, is trying to figure out what the other side can possibly argue and how you will probably rebut those ideas. That is to say, you preempt arguments and try to rebut them in the case prep, so that you are not caught off guard during a debate and you are like, kya bole, kya bole, kya bole. In the case prep itself, you try to preempt कि अच्छा वो क्या बोल सकते हैं, अच्छा वो ये बोल सकते हैं, ठीक है, उसके response हम ये बोलेंगे, चलो, good, and you get that ready as well. So I think that's how you can go about a particular motion. I hope that helps, Astha.
Yeah, that was very clear, but I think I have one more query.
Yeah.
So, in the recent debate you sent us, when the PM opened the case, it lacked the model and the basic, the foundation points. But later on, the DPM mentioned those points, and it was kind of that he bridged the gaps. So, is that to be marked negatively?
Yes. The reason for that is, again, so these things have a lot to do with the specific roles that have been told to you that a particular speaker has. In a this house will motion, it's the PM's responsibility to go ahead and set up the model, set up the context, set up the definitions, etc. These things cannot happen in DPM. Even if that happens, you are supposed not to take that into account at best. I'm not saying go ahead and deduct 2 marks from their 2 speaker scores from that the score that you're awarding them. But the least that you can do is not award that. Why? Because it's simply antithetical to the framework or the technical requirement of the motion. A PM in that particular motion or that particular this house will motion is not allowed to be exempted from the responsibility, and a DPM is not allowed to bridge that gap. And this sense of understanding has to come with you being thorough with the roles and responsibilities of the respective speakers, which was the first session which we took, and secondly, clarity about what different motion types are and what are the burdens of the different motion types, which Akshat took. So these two, if you're thorough with, you'll have a clarity with respect to what is justifiable and what is tolerable and what is not. In the case which you're talking about, clarification with respect to model specifications was not supposed to happen in DPM, if that's clear.
Yeah, but if that is so, that the DPM is not to be marked, then why should DLO waste time rebutting that as well?
To just so the thing is that you as a debater, you don't know what kind of adjudicator you're dealing with. You might be dealing with an adjudicator who doesn't know the nuances of adjudication and who might still value the contribution of DPM. At that point in time, if I as DLO assume that you are going to be altruistic and you're not going to neglect what DPM is saying, I'll probably choose not to deal with it. I'll probably just flag it by saying that look, this is DPM का matter, I'm not going to deal with it. But at a point in time, I'm not sure कि भाई आप कैसे adjudicator हो, आप शायद वो buy भी कर लो, then मैं मेरे लिए वो कॉस्ट बहुत बड़ा है उससे डील नहीं करने का, बिकॉज द कॉस्ट इज आई माइट एज वेल लूज because you I lay my faith in you without even knowing whether or not you're a legitimate actor to lay faith in. What if you're not? What if you actually end up crediting that and making me lose? Why am I willing to bear that huge a cost, right? So that's just for safety sake that a DLO goes ahead and does that in a situation like that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Great. Anything else? Good discussion so far. More questions. Come on, people. क्योंकि भाई अब मॉक्स होंगे एंड मॉक्स में ये इतना डिस्कशन डिटेल में मुश्किल होगा. मॉक्स के पहले अगर तुमको क्लैरिटी है देन इट्स गोना बी अमेजिंग. इट्स गोना बी अ फ्रूटफुल एक्सपीरियंस फॉर द बोथ ऑफ अस. तो बताओ.
Just want you to know there's no silly questions per se. जो भी doubt आ रहा है please पूछ लो, because otherwise then later on when you have doubts it will become very convoluted सा, क्योंकि you learn more things as well, तो सब कुछ mess up हो जाता है. So it's a good time to ask questions.
Yeah, I think you can leave in case there are no doubts. Or but just the thing is that in case there's a acha doubt and you miss out on that, that's probably a potential harm. Apart from that, I think yeah, you can leave.
I guess only two possibilities are there. या तो सबको सब कुछ समझ आ गया या सबको कुछ नहीं समझ आया.
हाँ एग्जैक्टली. इधर मेरे कैट का रिजल्ट निकल गया भाई. जल्दी पूछो क्या पूछना है. अच्छा ये मेल आया था मेरे को. अच्छा नाइस. या
हाँ अब कर दो.